It's a really great pleasure for me and honor to talk to you. And this is one of my favorite topics, talking to researchers. 2 days ago, we had a presentation for institutional leaders. Institutional leaders are very important when it comes to the adoption of the repository because they make some decisions. They are crucial to the sustainability of this, but it's basically researchers are the most important here as they are end users. If they don't use an infrastructure, then it doesn't serve the purpose. So that's why it's very important for researchers to adopt repositories. And I will try to show you through some examples, very practical examples, that it's actually beneficial for you to use the repository, and that the repository should be your favorite infrastructure. And I will show that it's actually doing much more for you than many commercial services that look shiny and they look very attractive, but basically repository does much more for you. First of all, I'll make an introduction that is the same as the introduction 2 days ago. It's very important to understand what a repository is, because we are not technical people. So when we see a website on the internet, we are not always able to see the difference, the difference, and to assess the quality among an ordinary website and a very robust database that actually has a really standards and the infrastructure behind it. So it's very important to understand what a repository is. So it's an online platform, and this platform collects, preserves, and provides access to scholarly content, but it does this in a very structured way. So you can upload scholarly content on a website, but it probably won't be optimally searchable. It won't be indexed by search engines, etc. So it's very important where you provide this content. And also, it's not an ordinary database that IT people that we usually have at our institutions can make, because they usually, they meet the basic functions, and it looks like a database. You can log in, you can put something there, you can search it, but basically it doesn't provide the visibility that a repository does, because for a repository it is crucial that it rests on some internationally accepted standards, and that it can communicate with other infrastructures that are relevant for scholarly work. So that's very important to understand. The repositories can be different in scope and size. They can be institutional, they can be national, as yours is, and they can be disciplinary, thematic. So if, for example, people doing, mass spectroscopy, or people doing genomics research, etc., they have their own thematic databases where they can deposit their results, the data sets, or their publications, and their colleagues can find them there. In Serbia, we have many institutional repositories. We couldn't make an agreement because the landscape is such to make a single national repository. We are a small country. It probably would have been much better for us to have a national repository, but that wasn't possible. So institutions ventured into creating their own repositories. In your case, it's very good that you have a national repository because it's centrally managed, and in this case it's much easier to make sure that the same standards are followed. And this is actually a good starting point for you. So this is about the metadata. So in the repository we use the metadata. For you, it's like you have a form, and you fill out the form, and it's human readable for you. So you have title, you have authors, keywords, etc. But this is translated into something like this that you can see on the left. So these are some fields, standardized fields, and you don't need to know those fields. It's for librarians to know these fields. It's important for you to know that the metadata are structured, and thanks to this, that they are structured in this way, your repository can communicate with other, it can deliver, and you will see later how it can deliver metadata to other services, search engines, and repository aggregators. Also in the repository, you can control access to your to your outputs, publications, and other outputs. So at the moment, everything that is in your repository is open access, but later on, when more people join and start depositing, you will be able to control whether it is publicly available to everyone, or it's restricted to, if, for example, if you have a copyrighted paper and you don't own the copyright and you don't want to breach the copyright, then you will restrict access to this content, and it is perfectly possible to control this in the repository. Also, you can deposit different versions of your papers and other outputs, and all these versions can be marked properly, and all these versions can be connected. So these are examples from my repository, the institutional repository, the repository of the Serbian Academy of Sciences and Arts, that is also used by 7 research institutes that are under the auspices of the Academy. And we use this practice of connecting, linking via those persistent identifiers. We are linking various versions of the same publication, for example, in the repository. On the right, you can see a form that you will not normally see, but it's for you to know that a repository manager, so in the repository, you will have repository managers. Now they are affiliated, there is a central team, and they are managing everything. But later on, after the project ends in a few months, you will have a repository manager at your institution, and whenever you submit something to the repository manager will check. So what you submitted won't be available to anyone except for the repository manager. So there is no risk that you can make a mistake. It won't be publicly visible. And then the repository manager will check and approve if everything is fine. If it's not fine, the repository manager will reject and return to you the record so that you can make and provide the instructions how you can make those changes and corrections. And after that, you will probably be able to resubmit, and then it will be accepted in the repository. So those workflows are quite complex, and there are many ways to control what goes in and what goes out. So there is really, if you have trained people working as repository managers, there is no risk that you can make an error. So that's a concern that researchers usually have, that they will, be in breach of law, but there are ways to prevent it. So what are the benefits for researchers? This is actually the most important for you. Why would you use a repository if you have various databases, various resources? So why would you use a repository? First of all, repository is a discovery platform, so you can go there and find the data, find publications for your research. So if you're doing research that is related to some topics that are relevant, for example, for the social sciences, humanities, etc., some issues that are related to your country and also the resources from your country, this is the right place to go and seek for this information. And you have different ways to discover this information. So you have on practically every page, you have, starting from the home page, you have a search box, so you can search there. Then you have filters to refine the search, and there are many filters. So you can also use Boolean operators and or etc. and combine keywords etc. to search terms to create very complex search strings. What is important for you to know is that in the repository, it's not only the metadata that are searchable, it is the full text as well. So if the full text is, I don't know, OCR'd, or it is from a digital born publication, then it will be indexed by the repository and it will be included in the search index. So when you are searching for some terms, if they are available in the full text, you will get a particular publication among search results. It is also very important for you to know, so this search is not like, it's not perfect. There is no perfect search, especially now you see that what's going on with Google search, with those AI tools. So the ranking of the results may not be always logical to you, and you will probably have to, scroll a bit and see a number of pages of search results. But that's because full text is searched. And if you turn off this option, then you will just search the metadata, but you won't capture everything. It's quite typical of repositories. It's not only your software. It's not that your team doesn't know how to set it up. So my IT team in Belgrade, we experimented a lot, and basically this is a compromise that you make. So the search is not perfect, but you capture more, and you search the full text. So don't just be confused. That's how repositories are operating. Also, you will be able to access abundant resources, because most of these resources, especially if it's about, I don't know, scanned publications or print-only publications, or the publications that are available, that are published by your institutions, but they're not sold, or the print runs are small. So this is the place where you will be able to access those publications. You won't be able to access them in many commercial international databases. So these publications bring a particular value to your repository. Also, you will be able to use the repository to showcase your research results. So on the right, you can see an example from your repository. This is a list of publications by one of the researchers. So in the repository, each institution has its own collection. We call them communities in the repository. So each institution has, and it has a profile where an institution can provide details about the important things. And also each researcher has a profile, and each researcher can provide information, persistent identifiers, ORCID, important links, links to social media profiles, and also a list of publications. So when you upload your publications, they will be automatically attached, linked to your profile. And when you go there and list, you will see your publications. Also, it's very important that you can use the repository to enable open access via the so-called green route, which means that if you have published an article in a commercial journal that is not open access, an open access journal, you won't be able to share the version of record of the final published version of your paper, but you will be able in most cases to publish the accepted manuscript. And I will show an example later from my repository how this is done. And this actually improves the usage of your research, and it also very often helps increase citation counts. So this is another benefit of the repository, because the repository is a very good place to do this. Most publishers don't allow making those manuscripts available in commercial services, like for example ResearchGate, but repository is non-commercial, so you will, in 99% of cases, you will be able to make it available in a repository. And also you will be able to publish there various types of research outputs, and I will show later what some of the ideas, but it's like it's not limited to the examples I will show. So you can put anything that you consider important for your research, you can deposit it in the repository. One of the examples that is particularly popular in Serbia and at my institute are conference posters. So conference posters, they are quite attractive. So researchers put a lot of effort into preparing them. And this is the type of content that many people like. For example, students, young career researchers, they like to see other people's posters. So we started making posters available many years before we actually established a repository, and then we just moved them all into the repository. So this is a PDF of the poster, and we provide metadata. So you wouldn't believe, but even this type of content is sometimes cited. And we had a case where a US researcher cited 5 of the posters by our colleague in their PhD thesis. So, but it's really nice, and they usually have very nice visit and download counts. So you can deposit posters. Also, you can deposit various formats of materials. For example, on the left, we have an audio recording. It's an online lecture that was recorded on Zoom, and then it's made available in a thematic repository from Serbia. Also, our researchers, they have technical reports, patents, etc. They usually don't deposit patents in the repository because we have an independent national patents database. But for example, those technical reports that describe this is a technological procedure that was commissioned by an industrial, a corporate entity, and they were paid for this. And this is an original technological solution. So this is taken into account in the research assessment, and they want to have this in the repository. These reports are not always publicly available. Most of them I can say are not publicly available, but we have examples of those that are publicly available. So, this is a way for those to be available to the assessment bodies, but on the other hand, they are also offered to the research community. So this one is an open access, it is also under an open license. Also, we deposit research data. So on the left, you can see a data set. These repositories are not, and your repository, perhaps there are repositories that are better suited to particular types of research data, but you can also deposit data in the national repository. So this is an example of research data deposited, and you can see those blue links. It's a good example how this data set is linked to publications, to supplementary information, to the accepted manuscript, to projects, etc. So it's a really nice way to provide context for this data set. On the right, you can see a data management plan deposited. So most people go to Zenodo and deposit their data management plans there. So since last year, data management plans are mandatory for national projects, and my colleagues, they prefer to make the data management plan publicly available in the institutional repository. So we created a dedicated collection to this project, and among other things, there is a data management plan. Also, we have a very interesting use case, the Institute of Musicology of the Serbian Academy of Sciences and Arts. It's a very small institute, but they are really making a really good use of the repository. So, for example, they have a journal, and they publish a journal, and they have a platform for the journal. But they observed that the journal is indexed by Google more quickly if they deposit journal papers in the repository as well. So what they do, they also deposit journal papers in the repository. But also they deposit other things. So on the left, you can see an interesting example of a type of research output that they produced, and that is not really a typical kind of research outputs. So they have musical editions, they publish CDs because they are studying musical history. And then each of those CDs has a booklet, and sometimes it's longish. And there is a study included and a description of what is contained on the CD of the musical items that are included, but also there is a bibliography, and there are some very interesting references there, and very often it's bilingual. So you can't find those booklets independently in libraries, but they provide the PDFs of those booklets in the repository. So it's a very nice way to showcase something that is usually, attached to something else. They're not depositing the content, the musical content of these audio recordings. They haven't started doing this yet, but they are publishing those booklets. Also on the right, you can see an example of an event poster. So they organize many events where they discuss things that they study. And these posters are interesting because, they have people at their institute who study, for example, study the history of such events. And they publish papers about this. For example, public discussions about the music history in Serbia in the 70s or in 1970s. So, for example, this can be considered as research data. As for future researchers, those posters will be valuable. They can see who took part, etc. And they are archiving the posters of the events that their institute organizes. And they really like this collection. Also, the Faculty of Chemistry in Belgrade, they have a student journal. It's a magazine more, and it's managed by the students. So they deposit it's also printed, but they deposit those PDFs of the issues of this magazine in the repository, and they have a dedicated collection to this. So this is a student journal, but on the right you can see one of the oldest journals in Serbia. It started as a monograph series, now it's a journal. It's been published since 1913, and they digitized the whole collection, and they made it available, publicly available in the repository. So this is another example, and I see that there is interest in Georgia. Last time we discussed this, there is an interest to make such things, these digitized things available. I can also say that items from this collection are really well visited from all over the world, because this is for many issues, this is the only place where they are available as digital copies, and that's why such collections that offer such unique resources have a really good metrics, really good visits and download scores. So it's something that we didn't really expect when we started developing repositories, but it's really nice to know to researchers. And also in your repository, you have this button that says visits and downloads. So once you start using it more actively, you will have access to this information, and I believe it will be very interesting for you to see what's the most visited type of content. Also, that's what I explained about author-accepted manuscripts. So on the left, you can see we deposit everything in the repository. It's an archive. So we deposit even the things that cannot be publicly available, but we want to have them archived in our repository. So you can see a published version of an article as it is published in the journal. It has all the metadata. It's quite detailed, but the PDF is not available. It's not publicly available. But on the right, the authors provided the accepted manuscript, so it doesn't have the final layout. It's the accepted version after peer review. And we have a national open access mandate. Not all institutions follow it, but at my institute, we are doing this quite strictly. So we provide those author-accepted manuscripts in the repository. They usually there is an embargo period, but when it expires, and you can set up this in the repository, so you don't have to go and open an article when the embargo expires. It just opens up itself, and it's publicly available to anyone. And it has the same metadata. You see all the DOI, you see all the links to the final version, etc. So it's so well described that anybody who comes here knows that they need to cite the final paper. So it's like, and it posts citations. So it's like a very good practice, even if you don't have an open access mandate. Usually, repository managers do provide a lot of support for this, because researchers are never sure what's the right version, etc. But it works. I mean, if you have goodwill and if you're willing to provide this, you will get support from the library, and there is no need to worry, because somebody will check everything before making this public. The repository actually improves your visibility. So here there are two examples. On the right, this is Google Scholar. And you can see that these are records from your national repository. It's really well covered by Google Scholar. It's indexed. So anybody searching Google Scholar can find records from your repository and can find links to PDFs directly. So it's good for you to, if you want to make your work available in Google Scholar, it's a good way to do this. And as I mentioned, colleagues from the Institute of Musicology, they observed, they were tracking this. So they have a small team and they team tracked. So they would deposit, they would publish their journal on the platform, and the same day they would publish it, they would deposit it in the repository, and that's how they noticed that Google captures repository very quickly in 2 or 3 days. And also another colleague used ResearchGate. So he would publish the, the, he would provide the same, the record became, you can see the records repository approximately. This one harvests the metadata approximately every 2 weeks. So this also contributes to the on the right is a book published in Serbian, published in, it's a print-only book that the PDF was available, and it was made available online in the repository. And we know that the book is cited more than 200 times. This is something that we wouldn't have known without it being published in the repository and then harvested by Google Scholar. So this record is from Google Scholar. Google Scholar shows citations. The other is a paper published by the colleagues from my institute, and I explained during the previous webinar, so I'm repeating myself for those who were there. It was published in a local journal. At that time it was a print-only journal. This paper wasn't available online at that moment, but we scanned it because it was interesting. It was in English. We scanned it and made it available in the repository. And now we see that it has more than 100 citations. So there are very good chances that if we hadn't done this, this paper wouldn't have been cited at all. So it's a very, because it's a kind of a drastic example. It's not a journal that is indexed anywhere. It's just an ordinary local journal, and it's not really well cited, but this paper was good. It was interesting. And by making it available, we actually made sure that it is also cited. This is a diagram that shows what the repository does to your research. So the repository disseminates your research very widely. It has some interfaces, technical interfaces. It has its way of communicating with other machines that you don't really need to know anything about except that they exist. And via those channels, the repository delivers metadata to many, many services, and those services disseminate the metadata even further. And that's how, for example, your research, if it's indexed by OpenAir, and it will end in to go triple. So I usually get questions from my colleagues that they say, oh, I found my paper, I don't know, in Open Knowledge Maps or in Go Triple, and I wasn't aware. So I said, yeah, we didn't have to communicate with Open Knowledge Maps and Go Triple because OpenAir did it for us. So, and it's very good because those services like OpenAir, like Bayes, like Core, they provide metadata to other services. They publish open data sets of consisting of metadata, so other services can use this content. Also, Google Scholar, you've already seen this, and on the left, bottom left, you can see, I don't know whether you use it, but I highly recommend using tools as Zotero, bibliographical tools, Zotero, Mendeley or a job ref, these are reference managers. So this means that people, for example, this facilitates citations. So for example, if a publication is available in your repository and the researcher can capture metadata directly without having to type the metadata, then these tools will make it easier for that researcher to cite and to include citations in their publications. So this is like you really, the only thing you need to is to deposit your research in the repository, and the repository will make sure that everything you see on this slide is done. On the other hand, and I like to use this information to use this slide, because many researchers, when we started developing repositories, they would say, I don't really care about the repository. It's like, it's an institutional infrastructure. I care about myself and about my career, and I have academia, I have ResearchGate. That's what matters for me. That's where people can see me. And you see what ResearchGate and academia do for you. They deliver metadata to Google and Google Scholar, but they are not as efficient as the repository, and they can they make it possible to, if the metadata are correct, if you provided correct metadata, and nobody checks the metadata when you provide it to ResearchGate and academia, people will be able to capture this metadata to reference managers. And they don't really communicate with all these services that you can see here. So I think it's quite obvious. And if you try to track, so as we librarians, we do this, if you try to track these effects in a number of years, it's quite obvious that repositories do much, much more for researchers. Another thing that is very important, repositories are owned by institutions. And institutions are responsible for repositories. And it's part of the institution's mission to take care about preservation. So your content won't get lost from the repository. ResearchGate and academia, they were in a position to delete millions of records over the past 10 years because of copyright infringement or even because of technical errors. So it's a good chance that your content, and it's your effort because you're providing some information to them. So it's a good chance that there is a risk that your effort will be lost and the content that you provided to those services will be lost. Whereas in the repository, there is a public authority taking care about this. So it's like, for me, it's very clear. A very strong incentive, for example, for Serbian researchers, especially in linguistics, they were not using ResearchGate in academia that much. A very strong incentive for them to use the repository was that the repository provided an interface in the local language, and they care a lot about this. So this is something that we didn't expect at all. But the fact that they had an interface in the Cyrillic and that they had an input form in the Cyrillic was something that was actually made the repository more appealing. So you never know what works with a particular kind of particular group of researchers. I mentioned profiles, so along with showcasing your research, you can also showcase your research profile. So this is a research profile in your repository. And this is something that after this initial stage of the project, researchers will have access to this information, and they will be able to edit information about themselves. So it's very good if you don't have ORCID now at the moment. Do register for it. It's very useful. It makes you more easily identifiable across all infrastructures, commercial, public, any, and include it in the repository. And you can provide your affiliations, different versions of your name. So for example, here you can also provide the name in Georgian or different variants of the transcribed name. So anything can be provided here. And also social media profiles like academia. So this is a social media profile here that is linked from the profile. And also research outputs are linked to this profile and anybody can see this and it looks really nice. So also what we did and what really worked well in our community, we as librarians and repository managers, we provide support to researchers to populate their ORCID profiles. So in Serbia, ORCID profiles are mandatory now, but even before they became mandatory, they had been quite popular, and we had campaigns to cover Serbian researchers with ORCIDs, and those campaigns were quite effective. So, but then people from the humanities, they would say, well, I can't really import automatically my records into my ORCID profile because they can't be found. My publications cannot be found in Scopus, in Web of Science, so they are not covered by those services. And then we explained to them that there is a way if the repository is harvested by OpenAir or by Base, they can use those services. But for us, it was simpler to provide direct support. So we instructed, and sometimes we even did this for them. We would import all of their records from the repository to Zotero, or JarBref, or Mendeley. So these are those reference managers that I mentioned that are compatible with the repository. We imported all the metadata, and then we created a BibTeX file and imported those BibTeX files into ORCID. And you can see an example. So everywhere where you see this dice, these are records imported from the repository. So this researcher, she had very few publications in her profile before this action, and then we imported about 70 records in a second. So she was really delighted, and she's now really using the repository, and it's like it means a lot to researchers. So that's how you can support, how librarians can support, but this is also how you can improve your profile elsewhere, not only in the repository. So that's what we are doing. That's how we at my institute, how we are integrating repository in other profiles that researchers have. So this is on the left, this is a page from our institutional website. And instead, previously, until some years ago, we had detailed lists of publications on every page. So we had pages in Serbian, in English, and I maintained this. So if we had a new publication with 5 co-authors from our institute, we would provide the same record on the central list, and then 5 researchers, and each of them had 2 pages, so it's 11 places. So I had to copy and paste the same thing 11 times. Now we are not doing this. They have a selection of 10 papers that they consider the most important in their career on the website, and everything else is in the repository. So it saves a lot of effort both to myself and to them. So on their profiles on the web page, we have this link to their records in the repository, and they can go there. Anybody can go there and see their publications. And what we also do, we integrate the same link in their ORCID profile. So it's a very good. In ORCID, you can also have a selection of your papers, but it's also good, even if you have a full list of your papers in ORCID, it's good to provide this link because it increases the visibility of the repository and usage, etc. So we provide those links in their profiles. And this is something that is, it's like 5 minutes, a 5-minute thing that really has an effect. So it's not a waste of time. We also advise researchers how to integrate repository into their research workflows. For example, finding literature is very important for especially linguists, historians, art historians, archaeologists, etc. And during the pandemic, for example, the Institute of Byzantine Studies in Belgrade, the researchers didn't have the access to the library, and they are using people from the institute. Very often they go to the library to use the publications published by the institute. So they had those publications digitized, but they didn't have the time to deal with them. So they used that time during the pandemic to make those resources available in the repository, and it actually made it possible for their researchers to work. So there are some, perhaps chemists are not using research repositories that much, but there are many, many other researchers that are using. So it's a good way, a good place to find literature. Also, it's a good place to share your research outputs as soon as possible. For example, conferences, they are not really visible. They usually don't have good websites, etc. So if you can publish your conference output as soon as it's accepted and make it available in the repository, and that's what we are doing as well. So for example, we publish a book of abstracts 2 months before the conference, and as soon as it's published, we deposit the abstracts of our colleagues in the repository, so they are available 2 months before the conference. Also, it's a very good place to share learning materials if you're a university, work at a university, and also presentations. So many people like sharing their presentations in the repository. They put some effort. For example, what I saw as people who have just they have to prepare a presentation when they're defending a PhD thesis, and they usually like to have this presentation available in the repository along with their PhD thesis. And also if they put additional effort and make a nice presentation for a conference, they really like to make it available. And also, I've recently had some requests to deposit audio recordings of presentations together with presentations. So it's really a good way to use a repository to make those materials available. Also, it's very good to use repository data in your reports. So if you are referring to conference or abstracts or proceedings or papers, my advice is to deposit them in the repository and then use the links from the repository in your reports, for example, for promotion or any other reports, because those links are more stable, especially because you will be getting PIDs, DOIs in the repository. Those links are much more stable than conference websites, which usually get removed after a year or two. So a good workflow is to put everything in the repository and then cite those links from the repository. Yes, for promotion, this is evidence. So instead of sending copies, print copies or PDFs with promotion, research promotion materials, you can provide links to the repository. And also, if you work at the university, repository is a good place to find some materials that you can reuse in your courses. How can you contribute as a researcher to the repository while at the same time contributing to your visibility in your career? Even if there is no mandate at your institute or your country, you should deposit everything in the repository. So it's good for you. And if you still want to use academia or ResearchGate, that's fine, but give priority to the repository. So you can also, for example, instead of making things available on academia or ResearchGate, you can provide a link to the repository there, and people will go there to the repository and take this content. Also, it's very important for you to know that websites, repositories, infrastructures, that are digital infrastructure available on the web, this is a kind of an ecosystem, and search engines as well. So the more you visit and other people visit your repository, the more visible it becomes to search engines like Google. The more it's used, it's more visible, and its ranking in search results actually improves, and it's visible on the first page and not on the 10th page. So if you provide links, whenever you cite your works, you provide links to the records in the repository. People click those links. Google captures this, and the ranking of your repository improves. So it's a bit complicated to understand, but it's very logical. So it's like help your repository improve its usage, the usage statistics. Also, it's very important to know that you need to deposit the full text of publications. So metadata records don't really help, because people can find metadata anywhere. They come to the repository to see the full text. So if it's possible, make it publicly available. If it's not possible, provide it and it will be archived, and it will be preserved, and it will be also preserved for yourself. Also, you can make the work of repository managers easier by providing accurate metadata. So it's might be an additional effort for you, but it will make the whole system more efficient, and they will provide very clear, it's not complicated, they will provide very clear guidelines how to do this. It's also very important for those PDFs that you provide that they have all the elements that are necessary. For example, if you have a book chapter and you don't have the title of the book, the publication place, etc., included in this PDF, but just you have a book chapter, those people on the internet who find this, they usually get directly to the PDF. They won't be able to identify this publication, and they won't be able to cite it properly. So it's very important to include all the important information that always think about the user. What can I do to make a user who finds this easy to cite my work, because I care about my work being cited. Also, if you find any errors in the repository, just report them, because the team will take care about this, and collaborate with the repository team. So it's like this active communication is very, very important. This is the form that is currently used by your central team to provide information for the repository. On the left, this is a team for individuals. So this is the information that you provide about yourself. And on the right, there is a form that will be probably updated soon about publications and other research outputs that you're depositing in the repository. So currently you are sending the metadata and you are sending the files to the central team. These forms will probably be available to those who don't want to deposit themselves even after this initial stage. And you will have the user manual and guidelines that will make it easier to provide very accurate information. This is all from me.